It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
So let's kind of jump out right at the beginning. So a lot of folks out there listening are in their 20s. And for those in their 20s, one of the questions I always want to decide is, okay, when it comes to housing, should I rent an apartment or rent a house and just throw that money away? That's the thing I always hear. Or should I buy where I can build equity and I can start? But if I buy, housing prices have kind of gone through the roof. So how do I figure out which one makes sense? Should I be an owner or should I be a renter?
So I think this is great. We did this in a very positive, a glass half full perspective. So we're going to give you the pros to both renting and then the pros to buying. And as we go through each of these, you'll see the first thing about it's actually a good time to be renting houses right now.
Yeah, it's kind of counter-cyclical. You would not think this normal, right? You think, okay, well, everything has gone up. If the housing market is up, that must mean that not only is it really hard to buy a home, not only is it really hard to get into a house, but it's probably really, really hard to rent. It's probably something where rental prices have kind of gone out the window as well. When we actually look at the numbers, that's not quite the case.
Yeah, if you look at the price index of housing versus rent paid for the housing, you can see that actually we have the hockey stick on the home prices have shot up. Meanwhile, rent, yes, it's going up, but it's a much more steady increase. Now, look, there is a chance this also will be impacted by the inflationary pressure and spike up too. But as it stands currently, there's a pretty big divide between where home prices are versus the rent on the houses that you're living in. That creates an opportunity if you are considering renting.
And one of the things that you have to decide whenever you're first starting out, whenever you're in your 20s, kind of figuring out the beginning of your life is how much am I going to pay for the place where I stay? And sometimes financially it makes sense to be a renter, and sometimes financially it makes sense to be a purchaser. But when there's this big divergence, when you kind of look at how much money you have going in versus how much money you can afford to go out, if it's a lot more expensive to own than it is to rent, it might not be a bad time to be a renter right now.
And then think about all the things that have happened in the last year to year and a half with the pandemic. Flexibility, maximum control of where you live, how you work. I mean, there's a lot of value to that. And that's, think about what I like about renting is that after your lease ends, if you need to move to another city, no big deal.
Problem.
If you want to change jobs because there's a better opportunity over here, no problem. Because that's what you get out of renting is that you can pick up, move away. You don't have to necessarily set roots. And right now with the world changing so fast, that's actually can be a very valuable resource.
That's one of the biggest flaws that I see young folks make is they say, you know what, well, I don't want to just throw away my money in rent. Well, I would make the argument you're not actually throwing away your money when you rent. What you're doing is you're paying an insurance premium to provide you that flexibility. I frankly made this mistake when I was in my early 20s because I fell prey to that thought, oh, well, renting is just throwing money away. I've got to buy a house, got to buy a house, got to buy a house. Worst case scenario when you rent and you have to break your lease, it is a small hiccup on your financial journey. You make a bad real estate decision that you can't get out of, and there can be long-lasting consequences
Well,
to
I
that.
think taking you as an example, you bought for the right reason, meaning the employer was in the town that you bought the house, you found your dream job, you buy the house. What does the employer do? We move.
We left
so, I
the
mean, it's
state.
not just you. You might need flexibility not only for your choices, but your employer. In this world that we live in now, things are constantly evolving and changing. So just kind of keep all that in mind. You get maximum flexibility and control through renting.
Now, another thing that I really love about renting, and this is a huge pro, is that you typically are not responsible for the upkeep, repairs, and maintenance. For those of you out there who have owned homes or have owned a number of homes, you know that when something goes wrong, you got to figure it out. You got to be the person to call the repair folks and meet them out on the property. When you rent, when you're in a rental house or an apartment, you can just pick up the phone and say, hey, this thing's not working, come fix it. And that's all that you have to do. There's kind of some beauty in that. I'll be honest, I kind of even missed that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's that's a big part that gets you carefree. Not only are you maximum control, flexibility, but you don't have to do all the maintenance and repairs. That's a lot of peace of mind there. Now let's pivot and let's talk about the pros of actual home ownership.
Sure. So the first one, and this is the one that people always think about, this is the one that I always laud, is that you are building equity in an asset. When you buy a house, you're actually buying an asset that has value. When you rent, you're just borrowing to stay there. You're essentially not actually acquiring any wealth in that property. Buying a house is different. You actually are saving towards a future asset.
Well, you get to set roots down too for your family, but it's what I like, and this is always a big part. I remember when I rented my first apartment in Atlanta right after college. I remember thinking how crazy it was that the third of the rent, because our rent was $1,220 a month, I was paying $420 because I had the bigger room.
The nicer room.
My parents' mortgage payment, because they had built their house in the 70s, was $370 a month. And I thought, how unfair is it that my parents' 2,200 square foot house
Was less than
my one little room in the city of Atlanta. And what that is that's the benefit of you're just making a principal and interest payment. Your payment doesn't change.
That's exactly
so
right.
there's a lot of value in that because as things get more expensive, you're locked in.
When you're a renter, you're often at the whim of what's going on in the real estate market. If you're in an apartment or in a house and the end of your lease comes up, one of the things you usually have to do before the landlord is willing to renew your lease is you have to accept some sort of increase in price. So if we are in an inflationary environment where a lot of things will begin to get more expensive, rent is going to be one of those things that's going to continue to trickle up.
Yeah, another pro of housing is you get to, and I mentioned this, you get to set roots for your family.
Sure.
Think of it. School systems are so important, especially if you have a growing family. So it is nice if you buy into a great community, great schools. You know that, hey, your neighbor's probably going to be there for a little bit. It's not going to be as transient. You're going to be able to actually make relationships. Your kids are going to be able to grow up. You're going to be able to make improvements on the house. All these things build into the positive column of purchasing a home.
And you get to be in a little bit of control over your landlord having control, right? So your landlord might decide they want to sell the property or they no longer want to rent it or they want to move back in. And as a renter, once your lease is up, you don't really have any recourse. Once you are a homeowner, you get to say, no, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to stay.
Another benefit to purchasing right now, this is time specific. Interest rates are super low, Bo.
I would say historically low in terms of absolute terms.
In a minute, I will talk to you about how that is actually very powerful with your purchasing power as well. But for right now, I want to talk about, here's another part that when you're in a rapidly price increasing market, why homeownership is a good thing is that you actually get on team appreciating real estate. And
you get on team appreciating real estate. That's the team that you're on is right there.
Well, I mean, it is one of those things because I didn't know if you guys followed the Vampire versus Werewolf Twilight series,
Twilight,
because there was Team Jacob and
the other
Edward.
One. Edward.
It was Edward, so I didn't know. So this is like team appreciating real estate. And what I mean by this is we actually did an illustration on it, is that right now it's not uncommon. And I brought in a newspaper article, the zip code I live in some aspects. Now, this is not necessarily all the houses, but the zip code as a whole, the average purchase price has changed by 55% in the last year. So,
the average purchase price in that zip code is 55% higher this year than it was last year.
Exactly. So now that doesn't mean houses have appreciated 55%, but it means on new construction, definitely a much higher cost. So it's not uncommon to see the houses in rapidly increasing areas is going up 15, 20, 25%. So we want to show you, what does that mean? Does anybody, can they tell us the numbers and how this impacts? Because this hits you in actually two ways. First of all, as the house appreciates rapidly and you're trying to get on this, remember this is for 20-year-olds making that first home purchase. You might feel like this entire market is running from you,
leaving you
because
behind.
You think, you know what, I'm going to do the responsible thing. I heard a guy on financial media tell me I got to save up 20%. So I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to save 20%. Well, the problem is you might save 20% and then you save up that whole year and you go buy and you find out, wait a minute, houses went up 20%. Not only do I have to put down more money, but I have to finance even more. We need to put some reality into this situation.
Yeah, so we said, let's look at a home in 2020. If in 2020 you were going to buy a house that cost $300,000 and you wanted to put 20% down, we'll talk about more of that in a second, you'd have to save up $60,000 for that down payment. If we saw a price increase of 20%, where in 2021 that exact same home is now $360,000, not only is the cost of the home more, but now to come up with the 20% down payment, instead of only saving $60,000, you've got to save $72,000. That means you needed to save an extra $1,000 a month or $12,000 over the last year just to keep up to buy the exact same house that you could have bought last year. It is good to be on Team Appreciating Real Estate. It is frustrating to be chasing Team Appreciating Real Estate.
Yeah, and that's a big problem because, like I said, Bo just shared it. You had to come up with $12,000 more on the down payment, and your mortgage balance increased by $48,000. Guys, that's troubling. And that's why, we always try to give maximum flexibility. We'll cover it in the 30s, but I'll go ahead and say it right now. We give maximum flexibility on first-time home purchases because of things just like this. Instead of 20% down, it might make sense when you get to the point of purchasing to put down that 3 to 5% that some of the unique financing opportunities present for first-time home buyers.
And the other thing that you have to do is whether you are making the decision to buy or to rent, one of the things you want to always make sure you subscribe to is you understand how much you can afford. And that's not how much the mortgage lender tells you can afford or how much the person at the front desk of the apartment tells you can afford. If you want to follow the Money Guy rule of thumb, we think that you should not spend more than 25% of your total monthly income on your housing allowance. So you want to make sure you keep that number below 25% to keep it inside the guardrails.